I found myself alone at home, wrapped in a cocoon of blankets, my body burning with a high fever that seemed to consume every ounce of my strength. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought and emotion. My family had left for France just days before, their excitement palpable as they packed their bags and chatted about their plans. My sister, Lindsay, had been particularly animated, her eyes sparkling as she talked about attending Paris Fashion Week. She had been dreaming of this trip for months, and her enthusiasm was infectious for everyone but me. I had been feeling unwell for days, but my symptoms were brushed off as a bad cold. No one seemed to notice how much worse I was getting, or if they did, they didn't let it interfere with their plans. So, there I was, alone while they jetted off to Paris, leaving me to fend for myself. As I lay there, shivering under the weight of my blankets, I couldn't help but feel a familiar ache in my chest, one that had nothing to do with my illness. It was the ache of neglect, of being taken for granted. I had always been the responsible one in the family, the one who kept things running smoothly. Growing up, I had sacrificed so much of myself, my time, my dreams, my health, to ensure that everyone else was taken care of. When Lindsay fell ill as a teenager, I was the one who stayed by her side, nursing her back to health while my own aspirations were pushed aside. I didn't resent her for it. She was my sister, and I loved her. But over time, it became clear that my role in the family was to support, to endure, to be the steady hand that held everything together. And now, when I needed them most, they were gone. The fever worsened, and soon I could barely move. My chest felt heavy, each breath a struggle. I tried to call out for help, but my voice was weak, swallowed by the emptiness of the house. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed my family's number, but no one answered. They were too busy enjoying their trip, too absorbed in their own lives to notice the missed calls. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, the kind that makes you question everything. Your worth, your place in the world, even the love of those closest to you. It was my friend Jessica who saved me. She had been trying to reach me for days, growing increasingly worried when I didn't respond to her messages. Finally, she decided to come over, letting herself in with the spare key I had given her. What she found was horrifying. Me, barely conscious, my skin pale and clammy, my breathing shallow and labored. Without hesitation, she called an ambulance, staying by my side as I was rushed to the hospital. The diagnosis was pneumonia, a severe case that had gone untreated for too long. The doctors were blunt. If Jessica hadn't found me when she did, I might not have made it. Jessica was furious, not just at my family, but at the situation as a whole. She knew how much I had sacrificed for them, how often I had put their needs above my own. And now, when I needed them most, they had abandoned me. In a moment of anger and desperation, she took to social media, posting about my condition, and calling out my family for their neglect. She didn't expect the response that followed. Her post went viral, shared thousands of times, and soon the story was everywhere. People were outraged, their anger directed at my family for prioritizing a vacation over my well-being. The comments were relentless, a flood of condemnation that left no room for excuses. My family, meanwhile, was oblivious, at least at first. They were in Paris, caught up in the glamour of Fashion Week, their phones silenced as they enjoyed their trip. It wasn't until Lindsay checked her social media that they realized what was happening. The excitement of their vacation turned to dread as they scrolled the messages, the photos, the videos. They saw me in the hospital, frail and hooked up to machines, and they saw the public's reaction to their absence. The veneer of their perfect lives began to crack, exposing the raw emotions underneath. They rushed back to the States, their vacation cut short, but the damage had already been done. The public backlash was intense, and they were forced to confront the reality of their actions. My grandmother, Elizabeth, was waiting for them when they returned, her fury unlike anything I had ever seen. She had always been the matriarch of our family, the one who held us together, and now she was the one who held them accountable. She didn't mince words, her voice trembling with anger as she expressed her disappointment. "How could you?" she demanded, her eyes blazing. "How could you leave her like that? She's always been there for you, and this is how you repay her." It was a painful moment, but a necessary one. For the first time, I saw my family truly confronted with the gravity of their actions. My father, usually so composed, looked shaken, his face pale as he listened to my grandmother's words. Lindsay was in tears, her hands trembling as she tried to explain herself. But there were no excuses, no justifications that could make this right. They had failed me, and they knew it. In the weeks that followed, as I fought to recover, I noticed subtle changes in my family. They began to visit me in the hospital, their presence a stark contrast to their absence before. My father, who had always been so focused on work, started spending more time with me, his usual stoicism replaced by a quiet vulnerability. He apologized, his voice breaking as he admitted how wrong he had been. Lindsay, too, seemed changed. The excitement that had once defined her was tempered by a newfound humility, a recognition of the pain she had caused. She began to talk about using her passion for fashion to help others, to give back in a way that felt meaningful. It wasn't easy to forgive them. The anger and betrayal I felt were deep, and there were moments when I wondered if our relationships could ever be repaired. But over time, I began to see the efforts they were making, the genuine regret in their eyes. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start, a step toward healing. By the time Christmas rolled around, I was finally home, my strength slowly returning. The holiday had always felt hollow to me, a reminder of the distance between us. But this year was different. We gathered together, the air filled with a tentative hope, a recognition of the work we had all put in to rebuild what had been broken. My father had started volunteering at a local shelter, his actions speaking louder than words ever could. Lindsay had begun mentoring young designers, using her platform to uplift others rather than just for personal gain. And I, for the first time in years, felt seen not as a responsible one, the caretaker, but as someone who mattered, who deserved to be cared for. As we sat around the Christmas tree, the soft glow of the lights casting a warm hue over the room, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect. We still had a long way to go, but it was a beginning. We had stumbled, fallen, but we were willing to rise again together. And in that moment, surrounded by the people I loved, I felt the warmth of their presence, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always the possibility of light.